The night was unusually still, with the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves outside the old, abandoned house. Inside, the silence was oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. It had been 5 years since anyone had lived in the house, a place that had once been filled with the laughter and love of a young couple, Anna and Miguel. 5 years since a terrible accident had claimed their lives, leaving their story unfinished. A new family, unaware of the house's tragic history, had recently moved in. They were drawn to its old-world charm, its spacious rooms, and the quiet isolation it offered from the busy city life. Laura, a mother of 2 young children, had always been fascinated by old houses and the stories they carried. Her husband, Daniel, had been more practical, but he couldn't deny the deal they were getting on the property. It seemed too good to be true. From the first night, however, things had felt off. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone, as though someone, or something, was watching them. At first, it was just small things: misplaced keys, doors that seemed to open by themselves, the faint sound of footsteps in the hallways when no one was there. Daniel dismissed her concerns, attributing them to her overactive imagination and the stress of the move. But then, their daughter, Sophia, began to speak of the lady in the white dress. She said the lady watched her while she played and sometimes sang her to sleep at night. At first, Laura thought it was just Sophia's vivid imagination, but when their son, Lucas, started waking up screaming about a man with a twisted face in his room, Laura's unease grew. One night, Laura was alone in the house. Daniel had taken the children to visit their grandparents, and she welcomed the solitude, hoping to finally unpack the last of the boxes. The air in the house was thick, almost suffocating, as though the walls were closing in. As she moved through the empty rooms, she felt a growing sense of dread, a coldness that seeped into her bones. In the living room, she found an old photograph tucked behind a bookshelf. It was a picture of a couple, their faces frozen in a moment of happiness. They were standing in front of the house, smiling, their eyes full of hope for the future. The woman wore a white dress, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Laura's heart skipped a beat. This was the lady in the white dress that Sophia had described. Curiosity piqued. Laura began to research the history of the house. What she found sent chills down her spine. 5 years ago, Anna and Miguel, the couple in the photograph, had lived in the house. They had been madly in love and had planned to start a family. But one stormy night, everything had changed. The details were unclear. Some said it was an accident, while others whispered of something more sinister. But Anna and Miguel had died in that house. Their bodies were never found, only bloodstains on the walls and floors, as though something had torn them apart. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind felt like a warning. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with the stories she had read, the ghostly figures her children had described. As the hours passed, the darkness in the house seemed to thicken, pressing down on her chest like a weight. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house. Laura bolted upright, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound had come from the basement, a place she had avoided since they moved in. Grabbing a flashlight, she forced herself out of bed, her hands trembling as she made her way down the creaking stairs. The basement door stood ajar, the darkness beyond it impenetrable. Laura hesitated for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. Then, taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and descended into the basement. The air down there was freezing, far colder than the rest of the house. The beam of her flashlight flickered as she scanned the room, her eyes straining to see anything out of the ordinary. Then she saw it, a large, old mirror leaning against the far wall. It hadn't been there before. As Laura approached the mirror, her reflection wavered and distorted. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw them. 2 figures standing behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The basement was empty. Heart racing, she turned back to the mirror. The figures were clearer now, a man and a woman, their faces pale and twisted with rage. The woman's white dress was stained with blood, and the man's face was contorted in agony, his skin blackened and burned. It was Anna and Miguel. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, the sound reverberating through the basement like a gunshot. Laura stumbled back, her flashlight flickering out. In the darkness, she could hear them, their voices, low and menacing, whispering her name. "We never left," the woman's voice hissed, filled with pain and anger. "You're not welcome here." Terrified, Laura fled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind her. She could hear their footsteps chasing her, the creak of the old wood under their weight. She ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to move on their own. Just as Laura felt the cold fingers of death closing in on her, the lights flickered on. The air grew still, and the oppressive darkness lifted. Daniel had returned with the children. Laura collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with fear. But as she looked over his shoulder, she saw them, Anna and Miguel, standing at the foot of the stairs, watching, waiting. They were not done. They would never be done.